Welcome, friends. It's nighttime here, and my kids have finally fallen asleep on their new bunk bed we got for free. I really love getting things for free, so I had to share. It's like buy used and save the difference. Following the Duggars without even trying to over here, friends. Anyway, before I can head off to bed, I need to share with you this follow-up to my video about keeping up with the Wallers. As I continue down my rabbit hole about the IBLP, I found several videos, articles, and testimonials that led me to learning about the IBLP's principle of unchangeables. Unchangeables are taught to children in IBLP families as early as preschool, as evidenced by Priscilla and David Waller's son singing the song of the Unchangables at Bible school on Sunday on their YouTube page. You can check it out if you want to on their YouTube page, but I've decided not to show it here to protect those kids' identities, and instead share an older version from the IBLP YouTube page itself.
These children were able to attend the Children's Institute during the week of the Basic Seminar last fall. And they would like to share with you by song and scripture memorization some of the biblical principles and character qualities they learned about. Their first song is God's 10 Unchangeables. The principle of design encourages us to understand the specific purposes for which God created each person, object, and relationship in my life and live in harmony with them.
Disclaimer. As with anything in life, there are good and bad things about the concepts of unchangeables, the IBLP, Priscilla Waller, and homeschooling. My aim is to discuss both the good and bad in a balanced way, but mainly to put a focus on how these concepts may affect children raised in the IBLP. If you have a great homeschooling program or are raising wonderful kids in Christian fundamentalism, none of this applies to you. Thank you. Okay, here we go, friends. The IBLP's Unchangeables are a list of 10 attributes every human being must learn to accept were bestowed on them by God. Therefore, they are not to be changed, even if it was miraculously possible by the invention of man. And the list reads like this. Number 1, parents. God not only chose the father and mother who brought you into this world, he also fully understood the factors and circumstances that surrounded your conception and birth. Since the fall of Adam and Eve, God has had to work through imperfect parents to accomplish his purposes in the world. Some of the weaknesses of your parents will be passed down to you. To compensate for this challenge, God provides special grace to deal with imperfections. 2. Physical features. God prescribed all of your physical features before you were ever born. Your height, voice, body build, metabolism, complexion, eyes, ears, hands, feet, and countless other features down to the smallest detail. They are expressions of His love and creativity, and they are also part of His purpose for you. 3. Gender. God created male and female and made a clear distinction between them. Wishing to be of the opposite sex will hinder you from accepting the God-given responsibilities He has assigned to your gender. 4. Brothers and sisters. Accepting brothers and sisters involves accepting their personalities, abilities, and talents, as well as their physical defects and failures. Through the relationships and challenges you encounter together, God will develop character qualities in your lives. If you do not have siblings, God will use other ways to build the godly qualities in your life. Loneliness can serve as a signal to deepen your walk with God. 5. Birth order. As you accept and understand the special characteristics, tendencies, and needs that relate directly to your birth order, you can avoid the destructive rivalry and bitterness that is common in many families. 6. Ethnicity. Each ethnic group has a unique culture and characteristics, but these races are actually one race, descended from common parents, Adam and Eve. Rejecting your ethnic and ancestral background will produce detrimental attitudes of either inferiority or superiority. 7. Place of origin. The place where you are from, either nationally or regionally, brings with it both benefits and limitations. It may include certain deficiencies you must overcome. 8. Time and history. Since God has a special purpose for you in your life, He has brought you into the world at just the right time in history to fulfill that purpose. To wish that you had been born in a different time is to reject God's purpose for your existence at this time. 9. Mental capacity. God created you with the mental aptitudes and abilities that are best suited to achieve His purpose for you. 10. Aging and time of death. God created Adam and Eve to live indefinitely, but on the day they sinned, the death process began. Signs of aging are God's reminder to make good use of the lifespan He has chosen for you. You can look forward to eternity with Him. Aging should motivate us to invest in the lives of others, such as grandchildren, children, and by counseling them and teaching them. All right, friends, these are the 10 unchangeables, and I'm going to address the many good things I see in these philosophies, as well as how it can be very detrimental to young children who are being fully indoctrinated to believe everything that the IBLP is stating with these principles. So why does the IBLP say you should accept the 10 unchangeable things that you did not choose? Because this is about building and showing trust in your designer, which is God. There are some things about yourself that you can change, such as your attitudes, behavior, personal neatness, but what you cannot change, you must accept as God's perfect design for accomplishing His purposes in your life. God expresses Himself through His creation. So when you reject yourself, you are actually rejecting God and His work in your life. When you are frustrated with your unchangeable features, seek God's wisdom to discern His purposes for these characteristics and choose to accept His design. Even the weaknesses, limitations, or difficulties caused by birth defects or the failures of others can be used as tools in God's hands to achieve great things. All right, so what I'm seeing here within the concept of unchangeables is a lot of good messages about self-love and acceptance. However, it is through what God bestows and accepts about you. But I get that most religions and groups have some standard of morality, and that's no different here. Everything I read about the unchangeables has led me to believe it is heavily focused on an IBLP in the early childhood, like preschool and elementary school age, to fully indoctrinate the child into understanding and accepting the concept. Self-acceptance is a very noble and positive commitment to work on early in life, and I see many advantages to this. For example, as stated on the IBLP's website, a child born with a cleft lip may fare better in a community that fully accepts that child's physical difference and helps the child fully accept it as well. But I can also see how sticking steadfast to these concepts can result in damage and toxic relationships. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you about it here. First, parents. It's good to accept that your parents will never be perfect, and that's okay. It's good to praise and appreciate the good things they've done for you. But should you fully honor and obey your parents in every aspect of your life? I personally find this philosophy a little difficult to swallow because I feel it's unfair to push a child or adult to accept a parent that's really unhealthy for that child. For example, a child who identifies as homosexual with a parent who believes homosexuality is a sin. If the parent is unwilling to keep appropriate boundaries in how they speak and interact with their child about what they consider to be their sin, I think it's unfair to expect that child to continue to fully honor their parents. Let's also look at the situation Joshduggar has found herself in. It seems like Jill still wants and has a partial relationship with her parents, but, and I feel this is rightfully the case, she has needed to put up some boundaries. I also respect and feel positively about the many changes Jill is trying to make in her own parenting style. You may recall from my other videos how Gothard feels about adoption. I feel like the unchangeable of parents relates to this. In the lawsuit against the IBLP, one of the victims alleges she was treated especially badly by Gothard due to her being adopted into her family. According to her testimony, Gothard encouraged her family to treat her differently and eventually ostracized her. This is partly because Gothard teaches that children who are adopted carry the sins of the forefathers. Also, allegedly, he believes adopted children can more easily be possessed by demons. I hope I don't need to explain why this is bad. Next up is gender. Many people would argue that gender is changeable and even fluid nowadays. I'm not going to get in an argument or take a stance here on the subject. I think there's still much to learn about and study when it comes to hormones and the effects of using them long term when someone wants to change their gender. In my own life and medical practice, I've known several young people who were much happier after they worked to change their gender in multiple ways, and I was happy for them. Unfortunately, I've also met several who were not happy after the changes, and two who decided to do everything they could to change back. But I do wonder if part of including gender in this unchangeables list is Gothard's way of continuing to reinforce gender norms. Like, you're stuck being a woman and being subservient whether you like it or not. Or likewise, David Waller, you're not allowed to help your wife with womanly chores or like ballroom dancing or ballet. No, I don't believe it's right or fair to raise children with such a strict, confining ideology and tell them that there's no movement back and forth along a spectrum. Next, siblings. Okay, friends, I'm sensing a big tie-in to the Duggar family here. So the IBLP specifically states, accepting brothers and sisters involves accepting their personalities, abilities, and talents, as well as their physical defects and failures. Through the relationships and challenges you encounter together, God will develop character qualities in your lives. Yes, I believe Jill, Jessa, Ginger, Jana, and all the other J sisters are constantly feeling pressure to accept and love Joshduggar, despite how they may be feeling on the inside. I'm sure some of them actually do have fond feelings towards Josh as a brother. But it should be supported and even heralded if one or more of the sisters wants to speak their truth about all the pain and devastation Josh has caused. It should be listened to if a sister says, I don't feel comfortable with him. I need a boundary. I can't be around him anymore. I don't want my children around him anymore. I think the Duggars are holding steadfast the self-help ideas in the IBLP and reverting to constantly forgiving Josh and pressuring everyone around him to do the same. This isn't good. This is a prime example of how this ideology could be used in a toxic way. Again, I'm so proud of Jill for moving away from this environment and trying to create a safer place for her kids. And lastly, I want to address the idea that mental capacity isn't unchangeable. I'm going to talk a little bit about Priscilla Waller, but this commentary isn't all about her. It's more like she's an archetype of how any child in the IBLP might be raised, how they might feel about themselves, how they might internalize what they've been taught, how it might lead them to ignore opportunities, and how they can then pass it down further to the next generation. This is a grainy video I've watched several times where Priscilla talks about her own mental capacity.
One of the things that was really hard for me to accept the way God made me was my mental capacity, because it was so hard for me to do school. I would work so hard and try so hard to do even just the simple things like reading, writing. Well, I loved to write, but reading was really hard for me. And my younger sister was like amazing reader. She'd be reading the wisdom book sections and, be done in a minute or two, and I'll be like 10 minutes and I would try my hardest. And I was like, God, I'm trying so hard, but it was just so hard for me to figure it out. Simple things. And it took me a long time to realize, God, thank you. You allowed this weakness in my heart because I can be able to help others with the same weakness. And I heard a message that really encouraged me was, one of your weaknesses can be your greatest strength, because God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. So whatever it may be, whatever thing that it's hard for you to thank God for, realize there's benefits, because God made you special, and love the way that God made you girls.
So, to me it sounds like maybe Priscilla wasn't a kid who thrived in the homeschool her parents created. Maybe she had a learning difference or disability. Or maybe the homeschool was a bit chaotic and she needed more structure. She's clearly internalized an idea that she's less than, specifically less than her siblings, who she saw doing better than her in many subjects. When I specifically tried to look up learning disabilities and the IBLP, I only came up with a few articles about the Unchangables, but also some information about sermons, where pastors were concerned that learning disabilities could keep a child from fully participating in Bible study, and the advice was to look into getting the Bible on tape for that child. After looking through several articles where children shared their experiences with homeschooling in the IBLP and the Quiverful movement, I decided I wanted to share portions of those articles with you now. From the website called No Longer Quivering, this is from Vicki Garrison, an ex-Quiverful mother of 7, says her near-constant pregnancies took a toll on her body and depleted her energy. She wasn't able to devote enough time and energy to homeschooling to ensure a quality education for each child, and she says the lack of regulation in her home state of Nebraska allowed us to get away with some really shoddy homeschooling for a lot of years. I'll admit it, she confesses, because I was so overwhelmed with my life, it was a real struggle to do the basics, so it didn't take long for my kids to fall far behind. One of my daughters could not read until 11 years old. At the same time, Garrison was taking parenting advice from Quiverful leaders who de-emphasize academic achievement in favor of family values. She remembers one Quiverful leader saying, "If they can do mathematics perfectly, but they have no morals, you have failed them." The implication, Garrison says, was that if they're not doing so well academically, well, then they can catch up later on that. It's not such a big deal. And it was a really convenient way of thinking for me because I wasn't able to keep up anyway. This kind of rhetoric, Garrison notes, provided a high-demand justification for educational neglect. I would not have gotten away with it if I had had to get my kids tested every year. Erica Deagle Martin's story is particularly haunting about homeschooling. A homeschooling graduate of the mid-1990s and an ex-Quiverful daughter, Deagle Martin was pulled out of public school at age 14. Because she was old enough to remember several years of public schooling, she says she never really believed her parents' dire warnings about it. Her younger brothers were another story. When the school bus would come by, my youngest brother would go, "There goes the prison bus." Our parents had them believing that public schools were these horrible places, just dens of inequity. The narrative about public schools, she says, went something like this. How would you like to get stuck in a building with no light and secular, godless, atheist teachers for 7 hours of the day without even being able to see your parent or go out to play? As a result, she says, my brothers were terrified of the public school system. Like Garrison, Deagle Martin recounts notable educational gaps in her own family. There was little academic encouragement. One of her brothers decided to quit school at 16 and faced no parental opposition. The youngest ceased his formal education at the age of 12 when she left home and was no longer available to teach him herself. And though she was fortunate enough to receive S education before leaving public school, her siblings were not so lucky. Their parents never taught the 3 other children about S, and Deagle Martin remembers giving her 21-year-old sister the talk the week before she got married. She also had to intervene to ensure that her younger brothers learned about S. As for herself, when she completed her schooling, she says her parents did not allow her to obtain her GED as proof of high school graduation. Their reason? The girls aren't allowed to get a GED because we were told we wouldn't need it. It would open up opportunities that were forbidden to us. We would work in the family business until we got married and then become homemakers. When I talked about wanting to go to college, my parents said, well, you're a girl, you don't go to college. Melinda Palmer, 29, is another homeschool graduate who is forthcoming about the problems she encountered as a homeschooled child. She had no experience in the public school system and quickly came to fear it. Her father cast the local school as a corrupt example of the dangerous world outside the home. The family's isolationism created an environment in which everyone was so terrified of the outside, they saw no choice but to submit to her father's abusive rule for many years. She says they had come to believe that the tyranny of their father was preferable to what might await them on the outside. The oldest of 8 children, Palmer grew up in an extremely conservative family that ultimately went entirely off the grid. They lived in a rural country home in Vermont without running water or electricity. Though she says homeschooling started out with good intentions, it ultimately fell by the wayside, in part because of the sheer amount of work it took to subsist in Vermont without basic amenities, while also maintaining the large family's produce and livestock. It took so much time and energy to complete each day's chores that they rarely had time to study. Though she says all of the children in her family are literate, she says that in math, she never made it past the start of pre-algebra. Since leaving the Quiverful movement, she has found success as an artisanal cheesemaker, but many opportunities remain unavailable to her because of her upbringing. She speaks hopefully about continuing her schooling at some point, but feels self-conscious about working towards the GED at 29 when some of her younger sisters have already earned theirs. I study and read things all the time, she says, but I haven't done anything official yet. Palmer insists that her family was not alone in homeschool neglect. Among the various fundamentalist families that ran in her family's social circles, she says, I knew several families whose children were not very literate. Moreover, she points out education is more than just learning math and science and the facts of history. It's learning how to interact with other kids around you and figuring out what different kind of personalities bring to life. Still, this is not to say there aren't many homeschooling parents who are doing an excellent job of ensuring that their children receive a quality education. Most parents realize they are taking on a tremendous amount of responsibility when they commit to homeschooling a child. Though there are an awful lot of people who do an awesome job when homeschooling their kids, I have to wonder what Priscilla's homeschool was like. There is help and support for children with all kinds of differences and disabilities in the learning environment, but a parent without any formal training might struggle to recognize and help a child like this. I have to be honest, both of my kids have learning differences, and I can state that over time, it's become important to me, personally, to accept them how they are, and work to highlight their many strong attributes instead of just trying to fit them into the box that everyone else fits in. In that way, I can somewhat appreciate the concept of the unchangeables, but I also feel angry that a child like mine might be fully left behind academically and then left without the basic opportunities that having a high school degree can afford them. Have you watched Welcome to Plathville? It's another reality show on TLC about a Christian family with lots of kids. I watch it sometimes, and I really like how several common and real family issues are presented on the show. One more recent show focused on the older Plathville kids speaking to their mom and dad about their homeschooling. The older kids didn't get a high school diploma, and they're trying to get one now. They talk to their mom about how they wish the homeschooling would have been different, more structured, more academic, and they make a plea for her to change it for their younger siblings. So, getting back to Priscilla and her mental capacity. Check out my video, Keeping Up with the Wallers, and the live discussion I did on the Wallers for more information, but I've come to think that Priscilla Waller doesn't have a low mental capacity at all. She actually left home and worked at the IBLP in an administrative capacity for more than 3 years before getting married. She and her husband seem to have done well for themselves financially. They travel a lot, and Priscilla is actually very active with things like hiking and snorkeling. I do believe the IBLP taught her parents that a kid like Priscilla just needed to accept herself the way she was. A woman, a kid who struggled to read, a girl who is destined to be a stay-at-home mom. Children like Priscilla are smart. They do have the capacity to learn and change and mature with the right support. These 10 attributes are not always unchangeable, my friends. As I dive deeper and deeper into the IBLP, I am learning so much about how the children raised in the doctrine must see the world. Please join me for my next video, in which I will focus on Unchangables and the IBLP's principle of suffering. It's time to head down your own rabbit hole.